Europeans like wheat. Americans are fond of corn. Asians have a soft spot for rice. Let's talk about rice today. Rice, one of the most important graminea plants, was planted by the Chinese around 7,000 years ago. In the last century, thanks to multiple factors such as the dwarfing gene, the first green revolution of pesticide and agricultural machinery application, and Master Yuan Longping's popularization and application of super-hybrid rice, planting methods and the yield of rice per acres have been greatly improved. In 2002, the rice genome was decrypted by the team at BGI Genomics and became the first decrypted crop genome in the world. The completion of the genome project of a certain species marks a new beginning for the disciplines and industries related to this species.
Hello everyone, I'm Yin. Today I have invited two peerless masters in the rice fields as our guests, Professor Hu Fengyi from Yunnan Agricultural University and former Assistant Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and current Executive Director of China National Gene Bank, Director General Wang Ren. He is also a world-class agricultural expert. They had an amazing encounter more than 20 years ago. Professor Hu, how did you make the acquaintance of Director General Wang Ren?
It's actually very accidental of my acquaintance with Mr. Wang. Of course, it can also be regarded as a destiny. In the 1990s, we all had a dream of changing rice from annual to perennial.
It is a very important knowledge point of today's interview.
It was a revolutionary idea from Mr. Wang, who was serving as a Deputy Director General of the International Rice Research Institute. We contacted Mr. Wang to find out more about this fascinating prospect. At this time, Mr. Wang based in the IRRI in Manila, Philippines. At that time, Mr. Wang initiated 6 frontier projects involving research into rice. One variety is called perennial upland rice, which is rice grown in drier hilly soils rather than traditional flooded rice paddies. Upland rice cultivation demonstrates the most primitive farming method in the era for slush under burn cultivation. Every year after slushing and burning, farmers sow the seeds, relying on rain to promote crop growth. There are few modern agricultural techniques involved in this process, which is why it is described as a primitive farming method. The IRRI aims to change this variety from annual to perennial. Through this primitive farming method, we usually say spring sowing, summer cultivation, autumn harvest, and winter storage. This model of production is repeated every year. What if one planting could be harvested for 2 or 3 years? This was an idea put forward in 1996 by IRRI. When Mr. Wang served as Deputy Director General. It was during the time that I went to IRRI as a student for my master's thesis. So I met Mr. Wang. It has now been 20 years since we first met, and this project started, and later I met in.
When I met Mr. Wang in 1997, actually, he was less than 30 years old. Let's invite Director General Wang to explain why the IRRI was established in the Philippines.
In 1960, the Rockefeller Foundation and Ford Foundation in the U.S. wanted to promote the hybrid maize model and the dwarf wheat model, which were quite successful in Mexico, and helped solve the food security problem. In the late 1950s, the South Asian continent, particularly India, faced a great famine. So these two American foundations searched globally, found another place where they could gather a group of international scientists. Philippines is a country with a more suitable climate. You see, rice was found. Corn and wheat had been successfully planted in Mexico. So the next major food crop is rice, especially for the South Asian continent facing famine. In the Philippines, the crop can be planted continuously all the year round. As such, people there have 3 harvests in a year. So in 1960, the two foundations and the government of the Philippines found a place at the University of the Philippines, which in Chinese translates as the hot spring town. This place, called Los Baños, within this area, a plot of land of more than 30 hectares, was selected as the University of the Philippines experimental site. So, the world's first so-called International Agricultural Research Center had been established. Mr. Hu mentioned slash and burn cultivation. That is quite traditional. This so-called upland rice, or rice grown on the dry land, is not paddy rice. That's upland rice, right. The land is not irrigated, the stalk is relatively high. Their ears are small, they have little resistance to lodging. Lodging means actually, as we often say, falling down. In general, when rice is ripe, its ear will get heavier. If its stalk is soft, or it's soaked in water for a long time, or encounters other external forces, for example strong winds, as a huge external force, the whole plant will fall down. A fall like this will mainly lead to yield reduction. The yield is little or the grain won't be full, because after it falls down, the nutrient delivery is blocked. The photosynthesis decreases drastically. This is in rice production. Of course, as well as rice, crops including corn, wheat, and soybean, etc., all face the problem of lodging. So this is the largest problem in agriculture.
We may have to find a way to make the stalk much stronger. At the same time, it can hold heavy fruits. Director General Wang Run just mentioned another term called dwarf stalk. What does the concept of dwarf stalk?
Rice has been domesticated for thousands of years. In China, almost more than 7,500 years ago. So the rice at that time was not the same thing as our rice now. The so-called stalk was very tall and thin. The ears were also small. If we take a comparison, it is close to wild rice. In 1957 and 1958 last century, they bred the rice with thick stalks and larger ears. So, as I just said, when it was founded in 1960, the IRRI undertook its first task, to turn traditional rice into thick and lower height stalks. The stalk should not be so high. In that case, it can just withstand water pouring. In the 1960s, fertilizer had just emerged and very helpful for increasing yields. So, the goal was to cultivate a kind of rice. Such varieties were cultivated around 1965. The first one was called International Rice No. 8. This rice variety was very quickly promoted in the Philippines at that time. In 1966 and 1967, South Asia, India, and Pakistan witnessed a great success very quickly. This great success.
The big success refers to its yield per acres.
Its yield is much higher than that of traditional rice. At the same time, this laid the groundwork for so-called semi-dwarf rice.
In addition to what Mr. Wang has introduced, I would like to note that there were 2 farmer brothers in Guangdong province who discovered a variety called the low-cross linking variety. Later, it became the donor for dwarfing rice in the world. It was used for the selection of many varieties. The dwarfing bring it brought increase in density and increase in yield. Mr. Wang has said that chemical fertilizer was invented at the time. With the use of chemical fertilizers, the yield increased greatly. The global population also increased. In the final analysis, at this time, whether it's wheat or rice. What actually plays a key role is a gene called SD1, which is the semi-dwarfing gene at play. This contributed to the first green revolution, so we increased the yield later, which is closely related to modern agriculture. It's just a process. The Chinese actually contributed a lot to this. I found a lot of materials related to dwarf stocks and created a dwarfing variety. The most prominent contribution was made by our Guangdong Academy of Agricultural Sciences and many research institutions in Guangdong Province. Professor Huang Yaoxiang made a great contribution.
So this is a very crucial point. That is to say, in general, when we hear about a technological revolution, we always give all the applause and flowers to the gold medalist, overlook the silver medalist. We also forget a lot of coaches. All technological revolutions are actually founded on a series of these micro-innovations, even low-tech innovations. It takes not only the eureka moment of geniuses, but also the persistent hard work of many diligent people.